Welcome to Next Gen Mentoring Forum. The Next Gen Mentoring Forum series is to empower, educate, and illuminate individuals who are interested in financial planning industry. At each forum, an expert will discuss the topic in the field of financial planning with the purpose of inspiring critical thought and discussion. In today's session, I will interview Dr. Daralee Barbera about how to enhance diverse environment to grow your practice. My name is Dr. Chia-Li Chien. I am a program director of financial planning at California Lutheran University School of Management. I maintain an active financial planning practice specializing in succession program management, and I've authored 3 award-winning books, most recently a peer-reviewed research book by Pelgrant Macmillan. The title is Enhancing Retirement Success Rates in United States. Next Gen Mentoring Forum is sponsored by California Lutheran University School of Management Financial Planning Program. We offer MBA in financial planning that helps financial advisor pursue a leadership position of growing their financial planning practice by deploying advanced financial planning, effective client communication counseling, and streamlined practice management, as well as leveraging fintech. I am very honored to interview Dr. Daralee Barbera, who developed many outstanding advisors in the industry. Her executive role in the past, including Vice President of GAMA, in case of anyone who doesn't know the organization, GAMA International, and the Regional Director of Waddell & Reed in the Southern California. Most recently, Women in Insurance and Financial Services named Dr. Barbera Women of the Year. Dr. Barbera has co-authors 2 outstanding books, and you can see that on the screen: Women Matter, The Why and How of Gender Diversity in Financial Services, and What You Can Do When You Can't, 21 Days to Personal Success. Her doctoral dissertation covered financial literacy for women and the role of financial education. Dr. Barbera is a business coach, consultant, and professor. And so welcome, Dr. Barbera, for coming into, returning to our webinar session today. So there are a lot of talks about diversity, and I wanted to get your opinion about what do you think diversity actually means?
Well, and thank you for having me here today, Dr. Jen. It is a pleasure to be included in a discussion so important and certainly prevalent as it is now. And certainly I'm so pleased to be part of the financial planning community, because I feel that when we speak of diversity and inclusion, and we tend to have these 2 words together in tandem, diversity and inclusion, there is no better profession than ours to address it and make such a difference. And indeed, historically, just by the nature of what we do as financial advisors, we address diversity and inclusion every day. So diversity, well, when I think of the word diversity, I think of diverse, and I think about different. And, when we, as you said, I got my doctorate, and in my doctoral studies, so kind of like an academic answer first, we think about areas of awareness, right, and diversity. So we think of demographics. So we tended to break diversity into 8 key analytical constructs. So we thought in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, ability, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, age, and socioeconomic status. But the important part of that is that, importantly, when we effectively address diversity, we are engaged in a respectful and engaged conversation with people that's meaningful, thoughtful, and discusses solutions to problems, and we focus on strengths. So how does this apply to financial advisors? Well, doesn't this just sound like what we do every day? Financial advisors, they engage clients in meaningful, thoughtful discussions to solve problems. So when I think of diversity, my mind goes to the inclusion, because this is what, as we think about solutions, and I'm probably jumping ahead, it is the visibility and recognition that we are all special and we are parts of so many different demographics, and that makes who we are, and who we are matters, and it's so special. But the important part is that clients can see themselves in our practices, that they feel welcome, that our diversity and our inclusion is visible. So indeed, an inclusive environment that is diverse is prerequisite for a solid planner advisory relationship. So you know, we think in terms of who is this client? How can we serve them best? So that's what I think diversity means.
So thank you. And let me kind of summarize what I heard. So what you're saying is that diversity oftentimes gets kind of typecast, if you will, within that 8 different categories you mentioned. Could be race, gender, what age, and so on and so forth. But I think that what you addressed was the inclusion part. And from a client perspective, client needs to feel welcome. And clients actually can see through very quickly if your practice has diversity or inclusion at all. And I recall attending a conference last week. The people are talking about, well, just having a seat at the table is not necessarily enough, right? Diverse inclusion is not necessarily enough. And the word came out next was belongingness. And that was something that I was actually kind of surprised to hear, because we are no longer talking about just from diversity from 8 different categories or inclusion, but also at the same time looking at the belongingness. And I'm glad that you mentioned about how the clients come into the picture in terms of feeling welcome. Can you give us some example about what does it mean by having client feel like they are welcome?
Well, you know, I think the word community is the thing that comes to my mind first. And as financial advisors, the financial planning profession, we do such a good job of really creating community on purpose. I think clients want to feel like when they walk in your door, or whether that is physically, and perhaps not physically right now, certainly with the pandemic. So when they walk in your door, whether it's virtually, physically, or emotionally, that you get them, that you get the client. And then also that the client wants to feel like they get that financial advisor. And we do that through creating a sense of community. I mean, I'll share with you a quick example that is not as deep as we need to go with this conversation, but throughout my years as being a managing principal, we took about, well, at least 5,000, maybe closer to 6,000 clients to baseball games, to the Dodgers, Angels, Padres. We created this community of baseball followers from our client base, and they expected to go to the ball games. Now, we had a great time, and we actually created this sense of community around baseball. We also took probably more than 2,000, probably a little under 3,000 clients to hockey games, Ducks and the Kings. So there was our other community of our hockey players, our hockey fans. So those are lighter communities of clients, but we definitely created the sense of community where everyone belonged. So, I mean, that's just kind of a fun way to think about community, but probably on a more serious note, you know, we do create community, sometimes on purpose, sometimes deliberately, but we need to create community definitely on purpose, so that when a client becomes part of our community, they have no doubt that not only do they belong, as you said, and they have a seat at the table, because when they are our client and they come to our office home, it is now their table, right? And in fact, with the pandemic, I think about creating community has been, although the pandemic has been difficult, the advisors that I'm able to visit with have been able to expand their community feel for their clients, because they are Zooming with their clients. They are not only clients feeling like they're part of their community, but now with Zoom and being able to come into the client's home so often and frequently, the advisor has been able to become part of that client's home community, in fact. And if you think about before COVID, and some companies didn't even allow video conferencing, that wasn't even compliant. Well, now it's compliant. And I think about how many times do an advisor can ask themselves, how many times have I been to my client's home? Well, maybe they went once at the beginning to get a feel for the home environment, or maybe they've never gone, or maybe they went to their office to get a feel for the professional office, but maybe the client only came to the advisor's office. Well, now with COVID, and I have observed that clients will say yes as often as you want to ask them, would you like to have a Zoom call or a call? Not all clients Zoom, but a vast majority, I think, do. But the advisors have really been able to keep that connection and maybe make it even more so. I mean, I know advisors who throughout the pandemic, they will just schedule Zoom calls to say to the client, how are you? Are you okay? And so keeping that sense of community where what the client feels is the inclusion, where it's client-centric, where it's all about them. And that is kind of a long answer. I am so sorry, but I get so passionate about the critical role that financial advisors play in being able to create and keep community. And we do that through that inclusive nature of that client-centric relationship. And advisors are doing it.
And I think that you point out several things that I thought is really key, especially for young advisors or newbies coming into the industry. And that is your first community example was talking about baseball, hockeys. And these are things that I remember that even though I didn't have that kind of community with my clients, but my clients and I actually have a community of doing food bank and volunteer work together in
Yes.
community. And so that whatever that community that you feel like is toward your clientele, obviously every client group that you service may have a different needs, and so I think that that's really key. So community of creating that activities to do things together. And yes, you're right, in this environment might be very difficult. The second thing that you mentioned about the connections, connection is part of the inclusion solution, where whether or not just by calling somebody asking, are you okay? Because in this environment, everyone has been working at home and somewhat isolated. Having a sudden phone call coming in certainly will be very, very well received. I recall that one of my friend who is an advisor out in Maryland area, she actually that's all she's been doing, calling clients, making sure clients are doing okay, even though there's not necessarily anything that she could do to help with the current environment, but just having that touch does make a huge difference in terms of the sense of the communities. So thank you so much for giving us that two different examples. But one of the things that I'm actually very curious about, for example, University of Illinois have teamed up with probably another 15, 16 universities together. They have something called Financial Planning Spectacular Day. That was just last week. And then University of Akron has 30 some other university, including us here in California, Lutheran University, had a diversity talk. And pretty soon in November, we are going back to the CME Boards Diversity Summit. I felt like there was so much talk in the industry. Can you give us some idea of what could we actually do besides all these talks?
Well, and you and I having our doctorates, we probably like research more than the average person perhaps, and enjoy it. So when you think about, to your point, diversity and inclusion, you can go get lost in the weeds through so much research, but we really, to your point, and I so appreciate, we must come up for air and say, how do we apply this to our practices? What can we do? How simple can we make it? And we just have to keep it simple and a real can do. So with that being said, I think that, the most successful advisors that I observe are ones that definitely have a people first perspective to their planning practices. So that works, where it's not the product first and it's not the problem first. It's really about the person first, right? It's like when we call during COVID and say, so how are you? Are you okay? And then listen. So it's that skill set that being the good listener. And in fact, gosh, when I was trained forever ago, I was taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them in that ratio, right? Listen twice as much as you speak. Well, I think as we read research now, it's actually changed. It's more like 3 to 4 to 1, that we should listen maybe 4 times as much as we speak. So, and that's really important. I think that this topic is so pronounced at this time of uncertainty for clients and folks. And it's also a great time through using these really pandemic sensitive, being pandemic sensitive to what people are, what's going on for them. And then using our really, what are the best practices, the skills of the great financial advisors. Let's just apply more of what we're already doing, and let's not forget what works. And that is listening. It's having an integrative approach to your financial planning practice, where we focus certainly on the exterior aspects of financial planning, which is the quantitative data, because we have to have that, goodness knows, in order to develop plans, implement them, and continue to execute on them throughout time to accomplish clients' goals and objectives. The exterior is critical, but the driver needs to be that interior, that qualitative component. And financial advisors do a great job of that. We just need to do more of it and make sure that the clients know that what's important about money to them, what's important about the kids going to college to them, what's important about retiring by 68 and a half years old, whatever the topic, whatever is important about that to them is the number one thing that's important to us too. And that we are going to build a plan around it. I'll tell you, I've seen so many advisors who keep what they do sort of a secret from their clients. We need to let them know that the way we develop their plans is around what's important to them. Because, as advisors, and I have a degree in math, I love numbers and math, but I'll tell you, we can't really share that joy with clients until we share the joy of understanding why is this just the perfect plan for them based on who they are and what they've shared with us. So being able to really focus on the qualitative components at this time, maybe more than ever. So
Yeah, I
that's
agree.
one thing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for emphasizing that. There are a couple of things that I heard from you saying, and one of the important thing is that when you work with clients, obviously we spend lots and lots of time listening, but they're talking to us, but we have to listen well. And
Mhm.
when you say that, 4 times versus 1, and that's absolutely right, because it is clients meeting. And listen well is very difficult to do. I remember that I have recently came across another advisor that I work with that she accidentally tell the client, so when are you going to go move forward with that particular product? I guess she forgot to ask about with the client, what is bothering you? What's the reason to consider a certain type of strategies? But I guess listening, one of the things that I meant to ask you was, do you have any advice in terms of how can advisor listen well? I think that's easy to say than done. Do you have any suggestion for that?
I do. which maybe that's not a surprise to you. Listening is quite an art. And it's the communication skill set that we need to be a good student of as an advisor. So it could be even a little more than just listening. I think it's how do you ask the questions so that it gives you the answer that you need, that gets you where you want to go. Someone asked me just the other day, they said, well, but I said to my client, how's it going? And they said, great. So what do I do next? So I said, well, you might ask them, help me understand, what does great mean? What was great? I said, ask them to explain it to you. So just keep asking more questions until you really have a clear picture of what was so great. And I think we have to, with this listening, be sure to ask about not just what's bothering you or, gosh, are you okay with the dark cloud? But let's have the bright sunshine too. Let's make sure that, and especially right now with COVID, let's bring clients back to remembering they had hopes and dreams. And we can still plan for those. We are still on a journey and on a track to implementing these hopes and dreams. So that did not go away, that we're still there with them. So listening is an art. I think communication is critical. It's you end up with the encoding, messaging, and decoding process. So I think for advisors to think about, when I say something, was my message clear and did it get received correctly? Likewise, when the client says something, am I sure I understand the message and am I receiving it correctly? So to always be a student of that 1, 2, 3 process, and to not say to a client, when are you going to buy that? I mean, that's because people like to, they don't want to get sold. So, but that would be, the question should have been framed in terms of the person and not the product, right? I think that's probably your point. So we have to just keep everything person-centric.
And I think that you're right, listening well does come in the skill of what are you asking, right? I remember a long time ago, I had a client that specifically tells me that after the plan, the very first thing that they want to do is to buy a long-term care insurance. And at the time I did ask them, why is that important? But I didn't have a follow-up question. I think that was my mistake. About 2 years later, long story short, at the time I decided, I went through the quantitative side, the number side, and affirmed them that they don't really need to have a long-term care insurance based on their situation. But 2 years after that, I was engaging in some sort of project, and I went back and asked them the same question. This time, because maybe 2 years passed, I had a little bit more experience. I started to ask much deeper questions, and I realized that I made a mistake 2 years ago, that I didn't ask follow-up questions, and then ended up learning a whole lot more about the reason they're asking for long-term care insurance. And I think that perhaps comes in experience and practice and all that. And asking good questions, confirming what client's saying, it's all sorts of the decoding that you just mentioned. It does take some time. So thank you very much for giving us that guideline, best practices in terms of listening. I'm going to switch gear of talking about clients for a moment. We have talked about previously that, in an uncertainty time, any kind of communication besides the product, besides the numbers, letting client know that you care does make a big difference. But from a diversity and inclusion perspective, will the client actually demand to have a diverse practice to work with? What do you think?
Well, I want to say yes, because by the way that we are speaking about diversity and inclusion, it's that being part of the community. And indeed, a client should expect to be part of that planner's community. And they should expect several things. They should expect to be put first as a person. They should expect the planner to advocate for them as an individual, right? To understand where are they, where do they want to go, and have a plan to get there, and then implement along the way with them until they arrive at their destination, which, you know, could be a multi-generational destination indeed. But, and also not to be treated equally or the same. So it's back to diversity and inclusion, but to have appropriate planning done for them based on who they are. And that is so important in so many ways. So, for example, kind of thinking back to communication, I think a client, and your question, a client should demand a diverse practice to work with where it is sensitive to when that client has a seat at the table and we hear their voice. Are we hearing their voice? Are we adjusting our meeting environment perhaps to their needs, to their comfort? I think what's so neat about having a financial planning practice that is truly an integrated practice, where that qualitative component comes first, it provides a setting where, I mean, I think it's impossible for any one person to be knowledgeable about preferences of every culture, of all people from all walks of life, right? So if we can have an inclusive culture where the clients, everyone feels free to sit at our table, and if we focus on them and we ask the right questions, we can figure out, how's our cadence? Is this environment appropriate? I've asked them to come to a restaurant, but that's not appropriate. Or I asked to come to their home. Oh, they wanted to come to my office. I mean, all the things that could go wrong, we increase and heighten our sensitivity and awareness to figuring out, how do we make every meeting go right? And it's kind of like you must be an observer of yourself and so forth to be able to make sure that what you're trying to accomplish is being accomplished. And I kind of have a couple of items that we can use as a checklist that we can probably talk about later. But yes, I think the clients must demand a diverse practice where the experience, because, you know, if you think about when you're a child and if you go walk back on the campus of a school that you went to, right? Elementary school or middle school or high school. Well, I know for myself, when I go do that, which I've done a few times, the only things I remember is not what I was taught. I didn't really remember the content of the curriculum. I really remember how I felt about the whole thing. I remember experiences and where my heart was and so forth. Well, I think that's what clients do. So we have to remember that the most important thing, because we want to attract clients, we want to convert people to be clients, we want to keep them as clients, we want to retain them, we want to grow them and develop them, right? I mean, if we don't have clients, we're not in business. So clients are really, really important to us. So we just must be sure that that client experience is tailored for the client. Like, for instance, I remember walking into someone's office and they had all these heads mounted on the wall from their big game hunting. Okay, now I'm a vegan. I was so horrified at that. I just will never forget it as long as I live, sitting there waiting for this professional to come out and greet me. And I was just dying. I don't even know what they said. I couldn't get the heads out of my mind. So it's like things like that. I mean, that's a little graphic, but it was true. And they had the bearskin rug on the floor. I was just not comfortable. So I had a very bad emotional experience. They could have been the best professional on the planet with the greatest skills, but I can't get past the heads on the wall. So that's kind of an example. So we really have to be sensitive of our inclusion, that people, so maybe it's a more neutral environment even, so that we're able to be appealing to all people so that we can hear their voice. So again, a long answer, I'm so sorry. I get excited about the heads on the
But
wall.
I think that the experience part that you mentioned about how you felt, that does make a huge difference. So when you talked about when you were in elementary school, and you're right, I don't remember any content, obviously, but all I remember was the sound and the summer hot heat. So you're right. So that experience, that is exactly what the clients are also going through their mind as well. But I'm going to ask you a little bit more difficult question. Today, in today's environment, if I look around of most of the younger advisors, if you will, most of the younger advisors I know of all have their practice virtually. So when someone is practicing virtually, how should they deliver that experience that we don't necessarily, because we can smell it, we can see each other, but we don't necessarily able to do much of other than that. What advice do you have in terms of operating virtually?
Well, and I think virtually just helps us resolve so many of these problems, right? And I think that virtual communication with clients, there will probably be many things that stay with us from our COVID experience. And this will be a best practice. And how to your point, to have an effective Zoom call with someone is really important because, again, it may not be the math they remember. It will be that they remembered the sound or the background noise, or the camera was crooked, or the person was sitting in the dark, or whatever it is. So indeed, I think that to be as polished as possible with virtual communication is really important, just from the technology, right? So we want to be
Right.
technologically very competent. But then we need to figure out what's the best way to orchestrate those meetings. From setting up an agenda for ourselves, whether it's a actually shared agenda with the client, which indeed is probably the best thing to do, and to have it be one that, depending on what kind of a meeting is it, right? Is it an introductory meeting? Is it an ongoing meeting? Is it providing a quarterly review of performance? You know, set it up so that the client understands the time frame, that there's no surprises. I think that's one of the biggest things to do, is to have clarity of the communication, beginning and stop time, being respectful of what they agreed to is what we provide. So to your point, there's a whole skill set to doing that well and making it comfortable for the client.
Yeah, I remember, and thank you for reminding me about the idea of share agenda. It is so critical. Uh, it's not just my meeting. If you want the clients to be
Yeah.
at the table with you, they need to also voice what they like to talk about, what is important for them. Um, One time I had a meeting, this was probably last year, with a married couple. And in that case, the wife was what I call the dominant player for the couple. Usually the dominant player makes some sort of financial decisions or decisions. And at the time, I was looking at both of them trying to squeeze into one camera, if you will. So I can
Ah,
tell that they were using one computer, and I can barely see him and I can barely hear him. So I actually have to interrupt the meeting and say, would you mind to switch the camera a little bit over to him so I actually can see his facial expression? What is he actually talking about? And so you're right. Sometimes it might be very dumb for me to ask that kind of questions, but they were actually giggling and laughing, and they were telling me that they don't know how to use a computer for the Zoom meeting. So I think that we, as an advisor, need to be not only proficient on the technology part, but also get the clients involved in the virtual environment. So thank you very much for that.
yeah.
Um, so when it comes to viable actions, what do you think some of the ways that practice could do now to greatly improve the diversity, the inclusion, and the belongingness from a client's perspective?
Well, I kind of have two answers. One is, I was thinking, and maybe I'll just pop this topic out there, because what I'd like to do is go through kind of a little checklist of real obvious things to me that people should look at. But I want to address if you're a solo practitioner, which so many of our advisors are, maybe virtually will really allow for that building of a team, you know? So, like for instance, say an advisor does not prepare taxes. Well, it might be great with a Zoom to real easily introduce, for 5 or 6 minutes, a tax professional who you want to introduce into the equation as part of your team, or an attorney if you're not an attorney, or whatever is a complementary profession that's part of your referral network. With the Zoom, we can so quickly provide the client access to really comprehensive services that maybe if we weren't stuck at home, it might be harder. You know, sometimes clients, they don't follow through, right? Where they say, sure, I'll call them. Okay. And so then it never happens. So instead you have a meeting scheduled where these folks are planned for. So I just wanted to mention that, because with diversity and inclusion, really the team concept, no matter if you're a solo practitioner or not, you can introduce people into your team so that, I mean, really, we are only ourselves, right? I am never going to be male, and I am never going to be 40 years old again, and so forth and so on. But I can introduce people into my team if I need them, who would be millennials or who could be male or so forth. And really with the technology of virtual communication, it's just a gift for us at this time. So I wanted to follow up on what you had just said. I was thinking about the sole practitioner, because, you know, when you're thinking about diversity and inclusion, and back to your question right now, what can you do about it? Well, if you're a manager, you can go higher to your gaps. You can do a gap assessment and say, look, my practice is 90% male and everyone's over 50. All right, so where's the gap, right? Non-male under 50. So that manager can go look for those candidates, right? But if you're not a manager and you're running a great practice, but you are who you are and you'd like to look a little more diverse, build a team. Build a team around you. And plus, you know, that's a great way to market. We should do another webinar on marketing and building target and natural markets. Okay, so, but truly building that referral base, the COIs, and having it be part of your team. So, so kind of back to what I was thinking about, you know, what are some ways to enhance your practice? I want to frame these questions that you can ask yourself under the umbrella of what do you look like, right? What do you look like really? So it's back to, if when you walk up to, actually, when a client drives up to your office, what's the experience from the beginning, right? From when they get out of the car in the parking lot, they go up to the front door, they open the front door, they see the lobby, they smell the fresh baked cookies. And I only say that because I used to do that. And they are offered a cup of hot coffee or tea. How's that experience? Oh, or are they offered those things? So how's it all feel? Like, is your messaging from the beginning of their journey to come see you, is it what you intend? And sometimes we have to call in some help, right? Because sometimes we can't see the end of our nose because it's right there all the time. So it's really great to have other people come in and see and give you input. So I can't recommend that highly enough. It is a great experience. So make sure your messaging is deliberate. Now, since we're not physically in offices all the time, how about your website? What message does that send? When someone looks at your website, do they feel included? Do they feel like, hey, I could go to this person? Or does it speak to them? So virtual messaging, what does the signature line on your email look like? I mean, everything. Is the message intentional? Or rather, the message you're sending, is it what you're intentionally sending? So that's one. And then how well does your value proposition resonate for different targeted audiences? And oh wait, are you sharing your value proposition? Do you have a compelling mission and vision to communicate? The answer should be yes. And then my answer is, please communicate it, so that, again, you're creating this community. And then language, back to communication. Is your language appropriate for all audiences? Are there gendered references? Do you use slang? Are you formal or informal? And so forth and so on. It might take another outside set of ears to hear what he is saying. And not just, what, I mean, you know what you're saying, but how's it being received? So back to the team, right? And then what about if you do eat food with your client or you offer them food? Are you sensitive to their dietary restrictions given their cultural background and so forth? So, and this just applies, oh my goodness, so much, you know, because you want people to feel included, not excluded. So don't invite me over and only have meat. Okay, I'm not going to feel welcome. So the kind of a simple idea. And then what's your social media presence? Back to that messaging. Will your clients or your prospective clients look at your social media and feel like they could jump in your community with you? And then how do you conduct your meetings and where? That's really important. You know, when you look at research, 11 to 25% of women feel rushed by their financial advisor. That is really important to note. If one out of every four women that you meet as a client, they feel rushed. Now, it's not just women, it's a lot of different cultures, right? Everyone's got their cadence. Do you speak too slow for some cultures? Do you speak too fast? So just being sensitive and being a good student of who are you meeting with. And then probably communication methods and frequencies, and this will just be my last one. To have clear expectations with your clients is really important. And really it's more, how often do they need and feel they'd like you to communicate with them, and then to be sure that you do it, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and so forth.
Wow, I was jotting down all the checklist that you're providing, and I'm saying, okay, I really failed most of them. Number one, messaging, right? Messaging, consistent messaging across, not necessarily just a website, the email signatures, the same thing that you say, so that, and social media as well. The second thing that you have is when you are speaking to the client, whether or not you are using the appropriate language as well. I think the language, the experience that you have mentioned in there, and I just kind of thought, wow, I really didn't really thought about that. And then when appropriate, you mentioned that if you are taking the clients out for dinner or lunch, dietary culture. You know, one time I had someone took me out to lunch, and I really appreciate that they have considered me. So they went to a Chinese restaurant, but they actually picked a restaurant that no Chinese will go to. And so I now I can relate to what you're saying, that they did such a good effort to accommodate me, but they did not know that that's a restaurant most Chinese will not go to. So that little tiny detail does make a difference. And then you mentioned about how you conduct a meeting, right? How the meeting is actually conducted. All of these little details, I felt like I probably failed probably at least half of them. But one thing that I do picked out, and that was really important, I think, is regardless about whether or not you're a solo practitioner or a bigger team, and that's the ability to build your team, the center of influences. I recall that it took me a while to build that team, but it's absolutely worth it. It's not just a one-way street of introducing clients to them. Oftentimes it could be another way that those center of influence will be introducing you to clients. The example you mentioned about clients not necessarily follow up on what they're supposed to do. And you're right, in my practice, I actually, in the implementation schedule, I literally have coordinating the meeting with the attorney at the same time, so I can make sure that they actually get it done. And when they are reviewing the document from the end result from the attorney's documents, I actually requested to be in the room to make sure that it is exactly what it's planned, it's supposed to meet with clients' goals and objectives. So thank you for sharing that. All of those are huge. It's not just a 2 checklist. I think that's more than 10 items on my list to do. So thank you for sharing that. Now, if you were to give one advice for the next generation of financial planning professionals, what would that be?
Oh gosh, only one thing. I would say have an integrated financial planning practice where you really build your skills on the interior aspects of financial planning and the exterior aspects of financial planning, and bring them together, keeping the client, all client centric at all times.
Right. And then that's part of what planning does, right? If you don't have that integrated process or planning, your clients is not going to get the holistic pictures, if you will, at the end of the day, and it may slow down how they achieve their goals and objectives. So thank you so much for that. This has been a pleasure. I took so much notes that I'm actually using 2 or 3 pages of my notes of what you're saying. This is very, very helpful. Thank you so much for spending time with me today for the interview. So thank you, Dr. Barbera. We're so
Thank
glad to
you.
have you in our Next Gen Mentoring Forum. I love to have you come back again to talk about Center of Influence. That has been
I'd love
on
to.
my top of my list to really share with others how to do that. So thank you very much for that. I also wanted to thank California Lutheran University School of Management Financial Planning Program for sponsoring today's Next Gen Mentoring Forum. Once again, California Lutheran University School of Management offers MBA in financial planning, helping financial planning professionals pursue a leadership position to grow their financial planning practice by deploying advanced financial planning skills, effective communication, counseling, as well as streamlined practice management in leveraging FinTech. Please sign up for our info session for more information. Our next Gen Mentoring session is on November 3rd, which is next week at 3 p.m., a little bit out of our normal schedule. Please join me to interview Dr. Eka Kumar on how to counsel clients without shaming them. I'm really looking forward to that because I have done that before, and I really want to find out how not to do that. And so thank you all. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you in the Next Gen Mentoring Forum next week. Thank you.